The deadbolt clicked before I even saw them through the peephole. My mother's knuckles were already raised to knock again, but I opened the door first, and she lowered her hand slowly, like she was disarming a weapon. My father stood behind her on the welcome mat I'd bought at a Target 3 years ago, the one that still said home in cursive stitching, and he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, into the apartment, at the granite countertops and the floor-to-ceiling windows like he was doing math in his head. "We need to talk about the apartment," my mother said. Her voice was calm, rehearsed. I gripped the edge of the door a little tighter. "Your brother starts college next year," she said. "We think it's time you gave it to him." I didn't answer. I just stood there, feeling the cold brass of the doorknob against my palm, wondering how long they'd been planning this conversation, and how long they'd been planning what came after it. My name is Elena Marsh. I'm 29 years old, and 6 years ago I signed a lease on a 400-square-foot studio in Denver with $1,800 in my checking account and a laptop held together with electrical tape. Today, that studio is a 2-bedroom condo in the Riverfront district worth $612,000, paid off in full, and it's the headquarters of a skincare formulation company I built from a kitchen counter into a business that did $3.4 million in revenue last year. I have 4 employees. I have a warehouse lease. I have a business partner named Denise who has been with me since year 1, back when we were hand-labeling jars at 2 a.m. I also have a younger brother, Caleb, who is 18, and who, until the morning my parents showed up at my door, I would have done almost anything for. That's the stakes I want you to understand going in. Not just an apartment worth over $500,000 free and clear, no mortgage. My independence. My privacy. The one place in the world that was entirely, unquestionably mine. And the people asking me to hand it over weren't strangers. They were my parents. The 2 people who taught me supposedly what family was worth. I want to tell you exactly how they tried to take it from me, and exactly how I made sure they never tried anything like it again. 3 weeks before that morning at my door, I'd hosted a dinner. Nothing fancy. My parents, Caleb, and my mother's sister, Aunt Robin, who never misses a free meal. I remember what everyone was wearing because I remember thinking it was strange. My mother had on a blazer she usually saved for church. My father wore his good watch, the one he only put on for important occasions. Caleb showed up in a hoodie and didn't take his eyes off his phone the entire night, which was normal. But what wasn't normal was the way my parents kept refilling his wine glass like he was a business associate they were trying to impress, not a teenager who'd graduated high school 4 months earlier. Halfway through dinner, my father raised his glass and said, "To new beginnings. Caleb's got a big year ahead of him." I smiled. I said, "To Caleb." I had no idea what big year meant yet. It was Aunt Robin, 3 glasses of Malbec deep, who let it slip. "So when's the paperwork happening?" she asked my mother, not lowering her voice at all. "For the apartment?" My mother's face went white. My father's jaw tightened. And Caleb, scrolling his phone, said without even looking up, "Probably after she signs it over." Mom said it's basically done. The table went quiet. I set down my fork very carefully, the way you set down something you're afraid you might throw. "What's basically done?" I asked. Nobody answered me. That silence was the first evidence. It wouldn't be the last. I didn't confront anyone that night. I smiled, cleared plates, and hugged everyone goodbye like nothing had happened, because I've learned that people who think you're calm are people who keep talking. 2 days later, I drove past my parents' house at lunch and saw an unfamiliar car in the driveway. I recognized the magnetic sign on the door, Fenwick Mobile Notary Services. I called the number on that sign later that evening, pretending to be a potential client. The notary, a friendly older man named Gary, mentioned unprompted that he'd just done a property transfer affidavit out in Aurora. Real straightforward, family situation. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. I called my mother directly. "Did you have a notary at the house?" "Oh, that was just for your father's boat title," she said instantly, without a beat of hesitation. "Nothing to do with you, sweetheart. Why would you even think that?" I said, "No reason. Just curious." I pretended to believe her. I am not a lawyer, but I am the kind of person who reads every clause of every contract I sign, and I know how to search public records. That night I pulled up the county clerk's online portal and searched my own address. There it was, a quitclaim deed drafted, not filed, drafted 3 weeks earlier, transferring ownership of my condo from Elena R. Marsh to Caleb T. Marsh, with a notary block signed by Gary Fenwick and a witness signature belonging to my father. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From clarity. The following weekend I stopped by my parents' house to drop off a birthday gift for my mother, and I heard them before they heard me. The side door was cracked, and their voices carried into the yard. "She's too soft to actually fight us on it," my father was saying, laughing. "She'll cry for a week, and then she'll sign it because she doesn't want to lose the family." "She owes us," my mother added. "We paid for 4 years of college. This is just interest." Caleb's voice cut in, bored. "Can we just get it done before the semester starts? I already told my roommate I'm not doing a dorm." I stood on the other side of that door for a full 30 seconds before I knocked, like nothing was wrong. Here's the part that changed everything. I hired a private investigator, a quiet, methodical woman named Priya Anand who I'd found through Denise's cousin, to find out why my parents needed this so badly so fast. It didn't take her long. My father hadn't just retired 8 months ago like he'd told everyone. He'd been let go from his logistics job after an internal audit flagged $61,000 in falsified expense reports. He was facing potential restitution and possibly charges, unless he could show the company he'd repaid the funds before their internal deadline, which was, according to Priya's source, 6 weeks away. They weren't giving my condo to Caleb for college. They were going to sell it the second the deed cleared, and use the money to cover my father's theft before it became a police matter. The gift to my brother was cover. I was never the target for Caleb's sake. I was the target because I was the only asset in the family worth over $500,000. I made a decision that night, sitting alone in my kitchen with Priya's report open on my laptop. I was going to let them believe they'd won. I called my mother the next morning and let my voice crack. Not fully, just enough. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told her. "About family. About everything you and Dad did for me." I paused like I was fighting tears. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been selfish." I started slouching more when I saw them. I stopped wearing my business clothes around them and wore old college hoodies instead. The kind that make you look smaller. I let my father help me understand the deed paperwork, nodding slowly like I didn't fully grasp it, asking questions like, "So this just protects Caleb? I don't have to worry about anything." Inside, I was doing something very different. I was documenting everything, every text, every phone call, every visit, time-stamped and backed up in triplicate, one copy on a hard drive at my office, one with Denise, one with my own attorney, a sharp, unbothered woman named Farah Voss who specialized in exactly this kind of family fraud. The reasoning was simple. My parents believed I was weak, confused, and desperate to keep the peace. People who believe that stop being careful. They start talking. They start signing things. They start bragging. I let them believe whatever kept them talking. I told my mother I wanted to make it official the right way, that I'd feel better if we all sat down at the house together and signed everything as a family, instead of doing it quietly through a notary like they'd tried before. What they didn't know was that Farah had drawn up a document that looked, at a glance, exactly like the quitclaim deed they wanted. Same formatting, same legal language up top. Except this version included a single embedded clause acknowledging, in writing, that the transfer was being made in consideration of concealing prior fraudulent financial conduct by the grantor's father. Language specific enough that if anyone signed it without reading closely, it would become hard evidence of what they already knew. I also asked Caleb casually if I could borrow his laptop charger before the family meeting, and while he wasn't looking, I slipped a small recording device into the outlet strip on the kitchen counter, the same counter where I suspected this conversation was going to happen. On the day of the meeting, I sat at that same counter with my phone face down beside my plate, a second recording running quietly through an app Farah had walked me through. Every few minutes it buzzed once, silently, confirming it was still capturing. I felt it against my leg through the counter's edge like a second heartbeat. My father laid the papers on the counter. "This is just a formality," he said, tapping the page. "Sign here, here, and initial there." Picked up the pen. My hand was steady. "Before I sign," I said quietly, "can we talk about the boat title?" The room went still. I'd arranged for this exact moment to happen not privately, but at my mother's 55th birthday dinner 2 days later. 22 guests, a private room at Bellucci's, string lights, the whole performance. My parents had insisted on hosting it there specifically to celebrate as a family. Now that everything's settled, they wanted witnesses to my surrender. I gave them witnesses to something else. My father stood to give a toast. "We're proud of this family," he said, raising his glass, "of building something and knowing when to let go of things for the people who need them more." My mother added, smiling at Caleb, "Some people just aren't cut out to hold on to what they're given. It's better in stronger hands." Caleb smirked into his drink. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I never do. "I want to thank you both for a lesson I didn't expect to need," I said, "about what family actually costs." I set my phone on the table and pressed play. My father's voice filled the private room, tinny but unmistakable. "She's too soft to actually fight us on it. She'll cry for a week and then she'll sign it." Then my mother's voice. "This is just interest." Fork stopped moving. Aunt Robin's mouth fell open. I laid the fraudulent deed on the table next to the untouched birthday cake. "This document," I said, calm as still water, "was drafted to transfer my $612,000 condo to my 18-year-old brother, so the two of you could quietly sell it and cover $61,000 my father stole from his employer before an internal audit deadline 6 days from now." My father's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. "That's not, you're twisting." "I have the deed," I said. "I have the recording. I have Gary Fenwick's notary log. And I have a call scheduled tomorrow morning with the fraud division of your former employer. Dad, unless you'd rather make that call yourself tonight." I picked up the fake deed, the one with the embedded confession clause, which my father had in fact signed at that family meeting, believing it was the final paperwork, and I tore it cleanly down the middle in front of every relative at that table. 2 men in plain clothes who had been quietly seated at the bar the entire dinner. Investigators Farah had coordinated with the company's legal team, expecting exactly this outcome, stood up and approached my father as the room went completely silent. "Mr. Marsh," one of them said, "we'd like to ask you a few questions." Within 4 days, my father was formally charged with felony embezzlement. His former employer pursued full restitution, and because he'd attempted to launder the shortfall through a fraudulent property transfer, prosecutors added an additional charge that turned what might have been a fine into an 18-month sentence. My mother was named as a co-conspirator in the property fraud attempt. She wasn't charged criminally. Farah made sure of that, partly because pursuing it further would have dragged Caleb's name through discovery, and I didn't want that. But she lost her position on the board of the community foundation she'd volunteered for 11 years, once the story became impossible to ignore in a town that small. Caleb, to his credit, hadn't drafted anything or forged anything. He was 18 and self-absorbed, not a criminal. I made sure Farah's report to the authorities noted explicitly that he had no knowledge of the embezzlement, only of an apartment he'd been told was a gift. I paid quietly for him to see a financial counselor instead of a lawyer. Aunt Robin, oddly, became my staunchest defender. She'd been horrified by what she overheard that night and testified to the family meeting conversation without hesitation. And Denise, my business partner who'd watched me white-knuckle through 6 months of this without complaint, I gave her a 15% equity stake in the company that December, unprompted, with a card that just said, "You never once asked me to prove anything to you. Thank you." It was raining the night my mother showed up at my door, 11 weeks later. No umbrella. Her hair flat against her forehead, a single duffel bag at her feet. My father's sentencing had drained what savings they had left, and the house was already listed to cover legal fees. "Elena," she said, voice small in a way I'd never heard it, "I don't have anywhere else to go." I stood in the doorway, the same brass doorknob cold under my palm. "I hope you find somewhere," I said quietly. It won't be here. I closed the door. Not hard. Not a slam. Just firm and final, the way you close a book you finished reading. Inside, my partner Marcus was at the stove, and he didn't ask who it had been. He already knew. He just handed me a towel for my hands, which were damp from the rain that had blown in through the cracked door, and said, "You okay?" "I'm home," I said. And for the first time in months I meant it completely. Here's what I learned. Love that keeps score isn't love, it's a loan you didn't agree to take out. And the people who call you family, the loudest, are sometimes the ones counting your assets the hardest. Protecting yourself from people who raised you doesn't make you cold. It makes you someone who finally stopped paying interest on a debt you never owed. If someone in your life has ever tried to guilt you out of something you built with your own two hands, I want to hear about it. What did you do? If this story hit home, hit like, subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments. Would you have let them in that night?